Hi, my name is Ravi. Welcome to my channel, Payment Talks.
Welcome back to Payment Talks and to the PACS.008 Masterclass series. This is part 2. How does the debtor agent actually create a PACS.008? By the end of this video, you will understand the 5-stage pipeline that produces every single one of these messages. Before a PACS.008 ever shows up on the network, 5 things have already happened. Initial validations cleared the instruction. This we covered in part 1. A compliance engine has cleared the payment. A routing engine has selected the path. An interbank settlement amount has been calculated. A UTR has been assigned. Only then does the message exist. So why can the bank not just take the customer's pay no one and forward it along? Because a pay no one is a customer talking to their bank. A PACS.008 is one bank talking to another bank. And that is a completely different kind of message, built for a completely different purpose. Let's pick up exactly where part 1 ended. Claudia's payment has been captured, validated, and stored as a canonical instruction inside her bank's payment engine. Layer 1, the customer's core data is sealed. Layer 2, the bank's enrichment layer is completely empty. Layer 3 has exactly one entry, an intake timestamp, and a validation flag. No UTR, no routing decision, no settlement date, no pack site. That is where this episode begins. There are 5 stages between Claudia's stored instruction and a generated message: enrichment, decisioning, routing, UETR assignment, and generation itself. Here is the part most architecture diagrams get wrong. These are not steps that happen one after another in a strict line. Think of them as conditions. In practice, enrichment and the first compliance checks often run at the same time. No partial draft, no placeholder, nothing. If even one of those 5 conditions is incomplete, no message is created at all. Generation cannot begin until all 5 are confirmed simultaneously. Hold that idea because we are about to walk through each stage one at a time, starting with the one most people mistake for a decision maker. Stage 1 is enrichment. Enrichment is data collection. It is not making decisions. These are two different services with two different owners, two different service level agreements, and two completely separate audit trails. The enrichment service writes to layer 2 of the canonical instruction, and it never makes a go or no go judgment. That call belongs to stage 2. Start with creditor agent. Claudia never typed Banco BPM into her banking portal. But the moment she entered Acme's IBAN, she specified exactly which bank she wanted to pay through. Two paths exist to turn that into a usable field. If the pay no one carries a BIC or account and local bank code directly, the bank validates it and writes it through. If only an IBAN is present, which is Claudia's case, the engine derives the BIC from the IBAN prefix using a bank directory. Fast, deterministic, low cost. If neither is present, the engine falls back to a name and address lookup, which is slower and sometimes needs human to step in. For Claudia, the IBAN prefix resolves to Banco BPM in Milan, and the engine confirms it is reachable on the SEPA SCT rail. The fallback use case appears more often than not in the production. The whole structured hybrid address that is getting mandated now is to get rid of this non-STP scenario. Creditor agent. The customer chose this bank through the local code or IBAN she submitted in Claudia's case. Debtor agent. The bank populates its own identity. There is no customer origin here at all. These two fields look like a matched pair. They are not. Let me explain clearly. Creditor agent information is completely given by the customer. Bank can never assume this information. So the complete or full information is required by the bank to STP a payment. Whereas the debtor agent is the processing bank itself. Customer does not provide this information explicitly. The bank itself populates the required information based on the rail it chooses to send the PACS. Please note both these fields are mandatory in PACS. Claudia never chose which of her own bank's big would handle this payment, and she never had to. That choice belongs entirely to the bank. These fields are just examples. Like these, we have other fields that needs enrichment based on the scenario and use case. Next, the engine determines the scheme. For Claudia, it sees an Italian IBAN, a euro to euro transfer, both parties within SEPA reach, and it logs to SEPA SCT. Similarly, for another case where the customer tries to send to another financial geography with a different currency, then engine locks the CBPR plus. This decision cascades. From this point forward, settlement infrastructure, charge bearer rules, remittance character limits, and address format requirements are all governed by that one lock. Even the routing depends on this decision. Get the scheme wrong, and everything downstream is wrong with it. Compliance runs three layers of checking: sanction screening, AML and PEP scoring, and cross border threshold checks. In some banks, we have separate systems to do these activities, like FERCO for sanctions and another system for fraud and AML, etc. The banking applications might differ, but the process remains the same. And every bank should follow these bare minimum standards set by the regulatory body. Banks can have more stringent compliance checks over and above the standards set by the regulatory body. Most teams screen the debtor and the creditor. That is not enough. Ultimate debtor and ultimate creditor must be screened independently too, because they can carry entirely different sanction risk profiles. Screening only the direct parties is a gap, and it is one of the most common gaps in production systems. These are examples. There would be other fields that needs screening. The concept is everything needs screening as per law. Two more enrichment checks round out stage 1. Limit validation checks the per transaction limit and the daily aggregate limit and writes either within limits or limit breach to layer 3 as a flag. Regulatory enrichment passes through any regulatory reporting data the customer already supplied, or if a corridor requires it and the data is missing, writes a flag asking for it. In both cases, the enrichment service is reporting what is found. It is not deciding what happens next. So here is where layer 2 stands after stage 1 completes. A validated scheme code, a validated creditor agent BIC, a compliance screening status, a limit check flag, a regulatory enrichment flag, and layer 1, Claudia's original instruction, has not been touched, not one field. Now the enrichment stage is complete. Stage 2 is decisioning, and this is where most architecture diagrams oversimplify. They draw a binary: approve or reject. Production has four outcomes: approve when all checks clear and the payment proceeds to routing; reject when there is a sanction hit, a hard limit breach, or an AML threshold exceeded. No PACS is ever created from a rejected payment. Suspend when there is a soft flag or missing data, and this is the situation where payment sits in the operation manual queue for their action with an SLA clock running. Challenge when the bank needs more information from the customer before it can proceed. This is not repair scenario. Rather, it is similar to RFI scenario where operations team reach out to the customer for more information. Here is why enrichment and decisioning have to stay separate services. Imagine a regulator asks, why was this payment held? Was it held because compliance screening flagged a potential match? That is an enrichment event. Or was it held because a compliance officer reviewed that flag and made the decision to hold it? That is a decisioning event. If those two services are merged, you cannot answer that question. And in most jurisdictions, being able to answer it is a regulatory requirement. Some banks purposefully keep this way to catch all the enrichment related issues or flagged issues at once, and then let operations take a call on the payment once rather than flagging the payment for every issue and work on the same payment again and again. Stage 3 is routing, and it has three possible paths. Direct bilateral, where the sending bank already holds an account relationship with the creditor bank and no intermediary is needed. This can be mainly observed in the cross-border scenarios on major currency routes. Via correspondent, where the routing engine selects one or more intermediary agents from its correspondent banking database. This is most common scenario in the cross-border scenarios. There is an important concept called payment chain building which is applicable here. Some banks just identify their currency correspondent and let that correspondent find the creditor agent and creditor. This can be seen in medium to small tier banks which does not have robust routing engine. Big banks with robust routing engine will build entire payment chain and identify the intermediary banks as well and populate or enrich them in the payment. This payment chain building is one of the critical steps in payment processing and we shall address this particular concept separately in detail via clearing infrastructure where both banks connect to the same shared system. This is nothing but domestic clearing. For Claudia's payment, both the Munich bank and the Milan bank connect to step 2. So the path is via SEPA clearing and no intermediary agents are needed at all. Remember, we started our payment talks journey with these concepts in our first video. This middle section determines domestic versus cross-border payments. If the settlement mechanism is a centralized regulating clearing, then domestic payments. And if the settlement is via correspondent banks, then they are mostly cross-border payments. This is the single most misunderstood and most important field right in the entire creation pipeline. Settlement method never comes from the customer's pane over. It never has. It comes entirely from the routing engine's output. The codes are INDA, INGA, CLRG, and COVE, and we are not teaching the mechanics of those codes in this video. That will be covered in the settlement series. What matters here is the source. This information also has impact on value that gets populated into the settlement account field. For Claudia's payment routed via step 2, the settlement method is CLRG, written to layer 2 by the routing engine alone. Even an approved fully routed payment can stall here. Every clearing rail has a cutoff time for same day processing. If Claudia's instruction has arrived at 1602 and the SEPA SCT cutoff is 1600, her settlement date would move automatically to the next clearing business day. This is exactly why interbank settlement is never a copy of requested executed date. Requested execution date is what the customer requested. Interbank settlement date is what the bank actually commits to the network after cutoff rules and scheme calendar are applied. Similarly, CBPR Plus also has cutoff times. Though the CBPR does not rely on any one clearing cutoffs, it will depend on the cutoff times of the banks as these banks are located in different geographies with different time zones. Stage 4 assigns the UETR and the timing here is deliberate, not arbitrary. Compliance cleared, routing confirmed, only then is the UETR assigned. Assign it any earlier and you create an orphaned UETR, a reference that shows up in the Swift GPA tracker for a payment that later gets rejected or cancelled. Orphaned UETRs pollute investigation workflows, trigger false positives during reconciliation, and confuse correspondents who get tracker pings for payments that never actually arrived. There are two sources for a UETR. Bank generated is the standard path. The debtor agent's payment engine creates a cryptographically random UUID 4 at this point. Other one is corporate supplied. Some treasury systems like SAP Treasury, Kiriba, Oracle Financials, and certain FIS configurations generate a UETR before the payment even reaches the bank. When that happens, the bank makes one of two choices: accept it and use it, or discard it and generate its own while carefully storing the original value. If the bank discards it without storing that mapping, the corporate treasurer is left holding a reference that no longer exists anywhere in the bank system. And that gap is hard to explain when an investigation opens. Under CBPR Plus, once a UETR is assigned, it is immutable across every hop in the chain. Now we reach stage 5, generation. And here is the literal gate the canonical instruction has to pass. Compliance cleared, limit check within limits, decisioning outcome approved, routing and cutoff confirmed, UETR assigned. All 5 at the same instant. If even one of them reads differently, generation simply does not begin. Once generation happens, every populated field traces back to one of the three sources. Layer 1, the customer's sealed core, debtor, creditor, accounts, end-to-end ID, and instructed amount, purpose, remittance information. Layer 2, the bank's enrichment, UETR, settlement method, settlement date, charge bearer, the creditor agent, the debtor agent, and the intermediary agents. And fields generated right at creation time, the message ID, the creation timestamp, the number of transactions, the instruction ID, and the transaction ID. Most of those regenerate at every single hop. The transaction ID is different. It is generated once by the debtor bank and then preserved unchanged for the rest of the payments journey. And one more thing, the PACS.008 is a snapshot. The canonical instruction itself keeps living and keeps accumulating new entries as the payment travels through the network. Canonical is the source of truth. PACS.008 is the representation. Now that you know when a PACS.008 gets created, let's answer a different question. Where does each individual field come from? 5 patterns cover every field in the message: direct map, pass through, derived, bank generated, and scheme rule. Next part of this series applies this same framework field by field. Right now, we are anchoring each one to Claudia's payment only. Direct map is the simplest pattern. The value is taken from the payno one exactly as it is, with no transformation, and written into the PACS.008 once at a generation. Claudia's example is her creditor account number, Acme's IBAN. It gets validated for format and then written directly into the message unchanged. Apart from these, few customer intent fields are also directly copied. Not all customer intent fields are copied as is. Pass through values originate with the customer too. But the rule that matters here is about the journey, not the origin. No financial institution downstream at any hop may alter a pass-through value. Claudia's end-to-end ID invoice number is set once in her Payno one, and it has to survive unchanged through every single bank in the chain, all the way to Acme. The remittance information field works the same way, but it is subject to a character limit: 140 characters under SEPA SCT, 560 under CBPR Plus. And that limit has to be checked before generation, or you risk truncation. One pass-through field worth knowing on its own is instruction for creditor agent. It carries processing instructions from the customer to the creditor agent. Cred, credit the account as normal; hold for collection; phone the beneficiary before crediting; tele, notify by telex. Structurally, it sits right after ultimate creditor and before instruction for next agent and purpose. And the bank may add its own instructions here too, alongside whatever the customer specified. Derived fields take the customer's intent as the input and let bank logic produce the final value. Claudia's settlement date is calculated from her requested execution date plus SEPA SCT cutoff rules plus the settlement calendar. And her creditor agent is derived too. Acme's IBAN is the customer input, and the bank derives the routable BIC from it. Customer originated does not always mean direct map. These two fields are the clearest proof of that. Bank generated fields have no equivalent anywhere in Payno 1. The bank creates them entirely. But this category is not one single behavior, it is 5. Generated once and preserved. UETR and the transaction ID. Regenerated at every hop. The message ID, the instruction ID, and the agent identifiers, because each bank describes its own bilateral link per hop, but discretionary.
Instruction for next agent, which carries instructions to the next bank in the chain, not the final creditor agent. And each bank may add or change it based on its own bilateral agreement. And starts empty, then accumulates. The previous instructing agent fields empty when the debtor bank creates the first message, then filled in by every subsequent bank that rebuilds it, building a chain of custody record. Now, vice versa. Initially, intermediary agents are populated by debtor agent if it creates full chain. As the payment moves through the banks, these agents move their place in the payment and finally be empty when payment reaches to creditor agent. Scheme rule is a mandatory override. The scheme's rule book defines the value, no matter what the customer's pay no one carried. The ISO standard defines four charge bearer codes: debt borne by debtor, cred borne by creditor, shar shared, and slave following service level. SEPA SCT mandates slave in the PACS.008 charge bearer field, regardless of whatever value Claudia's bank received in her pay no one. Slave is the code that appears in the message. The shared behavior it triggers is what the scheme then prescribes underneath it. Similarly, the CBPR Plus rules say no batch payments, which means the number of transactions field will always contain value 1. Let's put all 5 categories on one screen because you are going to want to come back to this. Direct map, pass through, derived, bank generated, scheme rule. Each row shows the category, an example field, and exactly how it played out in Claudia's payment. Pause here if you need to. Before we move on, let's see 3 confusions that come up constantly with business analysts and even experienced architects. Enrichment versus decisioning. One collects data, the other makes a judgment. Requested execution date versus interbank settlement date. One is customer's expectation, the other is the bank's commitment to the network. Instructed amount versus interbank settlement amount. One is what was instructed and the other is what actually settles between banks. Keep those 3 pairs straight and most of the field level confusions in PACS.008 disappear. Now let's go deep on the pair that causes the most implementation errors in production: instructed amount and the interbank settlement amount. The interbank settlement amount is built in 3 steps. Step 1, start with instructed amount. Step 2, apply FX if the currencies differ. Step 3, apply the charge bearer rules. Only instructed amount is fixed. The interbank settlement amount is not. And whether it equals instructed amount or falls below it depends entirely on what happens in step 3. And sometimes it would be in completely different currency when FX is applied in step 2. Let's run Claudia's actual numbers through all 3 scenarios. Her sending bank's fee is 5 euros. The receiving bank's fee is 2.5 euros. Under slave, which is what her real SEPA SCT payment actually carries, Claudia is debited 50,000 5 euros. The interbank settlement amount stays at 50,000 even, and Acme receives 49,997.5 euros. Under debt, shown only for comparison, Claudia would be debited 50,007.5 euros, and the full 50,000 euros would reach Banco BPM untouched. Under cred, also shown only for comparison, Claudia would be debited exactly 50,000 with no fee added on top. But because the creditor side is meant to observe the charges, her own bank deducts its €5 fee from the wire before sending it onward. That is what drops the interbank settlement amount to 49,995 euros. In every single one of these 3 scenarios, the instructed amount on the message reads exactly the same 50,000 euros. Let's slow down on that cred scenario because it is the one that proves the point. Under cred, the creditor side is supposed to absorb all charges. So Claudia's own bank deducts its €5 fee from the wire amount before transmitting it. And that is exactly what pulls the interbank settlement amount down to 49,995 euros. Instructed amount and interbank settlement amount are never the same field. Never assume one is a copy of the other. That single assumption is the most common implementation error in PACS.008 development. For more clarity on the charge codes, please refer to the earlier video where we clearly explained each charge code and its calculations. Let's run through 8 mistakes that look completely fine in a test environment and fail the moment real volume hits production. 1. The interbank settlement amount is never a copy of instructed amount. 2. The settlement method comes from the routing engine only, never from the customer. 3. Truncating the end-to-end ID is a scheme compliance defect. Catch it at enrichment, not after sending. 4. The UETR must be assigned after compliance clearance, never before. 5. Under CBPR plus phase 2, unstructured addresses are deprecated. Convert at the bank layer. 6. Under SEPA SCT, the charge bearer field must read slave no matter what the customer submitted. 7. Ultimate debtor and ultimate creditor require independent sanction screening. 8. The creditor agent is customer originated. It is not something the bank invented, even though the bank validates the final big value. One last thing before we wrap up. The PACS.008 is a snapshot, not an ending. The canonical instruction keeps accumulating entries as the payment travels, confirmations from correspondents, status updates, exception flags, and if something goes wrong, written information. Next parts of this series built directly on that continuity. Let's recap everything in one place. A pack set is generated only when 5 conditions clear simultaneously: validations passed, compliance screened, limits checked, decisions approved, routing confirmed, UETR assigned. Every field in the message has a source: direct map, pass through, derived, bank generated, or scheme rule. Instructed amount never changes. The interbank settlement amount is always derived. The settlement method always comes from the routing engine. And under SEPA SCT, the charge bearer field is always slave. Claudia's 50,000 euros is now in the network as a pack seat addressed to Banco BPM in Milan. In the next part, we see block architecture and field by field with full population rules. If you found this useful, subscribe on YouTube and find the full written breakdown at PaymentTalks.com. I will see you in next part. Until then, keep smiling and keep learning. Thanks for watching this video. If you like this video, please like, subscribe and share for more such interesting topics on payments.